Hi, I'm Thomas Flight. Welcome to Thomas Flight's School for Video Essayists who want to sound good. I'm not an audio expert, but some people have been asking me how I do my audio for my channel, and so I thought I'd make a little video here to show some of the things I do. This video is aimed specifically at video essayists, but theoretically it could apply to anyone doing kind of voiceover heavy like stuff on YouTube, gaming channels. A lot of the audio stuff might apply to other contexts, but it's fairly YouTube specific in terms of how I'm approaching it. I'm going to be showing you stuff in Premiere Pro since that's what I edit in, but everything I'm doing I'll be doing with tools that you should be able to find in pretty much any video editor that's out there. So I've been doing audio for several years now. I've done audio for commercial video for a number of years and for YouTube, and I've been podcasting and creating videos for probably over a decade now. And so I'm largely self-taught, but the biggest breakthrough for me with doing audio came when I realized that I could trust my ears, that ultimately what it comes down to is if I think it sounds better, then that's a thing to do. If I think it sounds worse, then that's a thing not to do. I'll get to some caveats about that later on, but for the most part, that was a huge step for me in terms of like getting more comfortable doing audio, was just like trust what I hear, make it sound better to me, and it'll sound better to other people. Final note, if you're coming here for some reason you haven't seen my other videos, don't judge my audio ability based on what you're hearing right now. I'm using kind of just a slapped together audio thing for this, for convenience sake. If you want a good idea of what my audio can actually sound like, go watch one of my videos at the Thomas Flight main channel. Before I get into software stuff, I'll just talk about some recording basics that I try to adhere to. So I record with one of these. It's not the best mic in the world, but it does the job. Any mic that you pay more than $80 for is probably going to be more than adequate for recording some voiceover for YouTube. There's things I don't like about this mic. There's better ones out there, but it does the job for me. I'll probably upgrade before too long. But if you have this or something similar, you're going to be all right. The mic, in my experience, is much less important than how you go about setting up, recording the audio, and mixing it. So it's a big factor, but not as big as some people like to think. So when I record, when I started out, I used to get really close up on the mic. They do what they do because the people who are paying them are asking for it. The viewers don't really care how the media got it, they just care that they get it, which has kind of a warmer, whispery sound. And that can be good if that's what you're going for. But over time, I've moved on to doing something that's closer to probably about 8 to 10 inches away. And I find that just sounds a little bit more natural. Wallace himself was concerned with the irony that he saw popping up on TV as a solution to this problem. As far as mic distance, the best thing is to just experiment. I went in one day and just recorded. I did a voiceover about like a fist length away from the mic. I did one like 2 fists and 1 3, and just kind of listened to those 3, compared them in terms of quality and feel, and went with the one that I preferred. It might change depending on your mic. So the best advice I can give you in that department is to just try a couple different things out and see what you like best. For me, I find that it sometimes is going to vary depending on the video. So some videos being closer up on the mic, sounding a little more whispery and having more of the deeper, lower end kind of emphasized is going to sound good. If it's something a little more energetic, then sometimes being a little further back off the mic is going to work better in that case. So again, that just comes back to like trust your ears, try different things and see what sounds better to you and go with that. Where you record, that can be a huge deal. I don't usually record in this room because there's a lot of reverb. There's a lot of outside noise coming in. Often I have a large enough closet that I can like go inside the closet, close the door. I've set up like kind of studio spaces with multiple blankets. Right now in this house, just recently moved, and I have a room that I can go into that works fairly well, and it's fairly quiet. Do as much as you can to isolate outside noise. The cleaner it is, the less trouble you're going to have cleaning it up later. Probably the best thing is to just get something kind of soft, like a blanket or something that's going to absorb the sound behind the mic, because you're talking in that direction. Your voice can go, if you're sitting right in front of a wall or something, your voice can go hit the wall and bounce back, and that's going to give you early reflections, and those can really kind of mess with the sound. Getting, if there's any walls near you where you're recording, getting blankets or something soft or foamy over those things is going to help a lot in terms of reducing your early reflections. If you're in a larger room, you're going to have later reflections and a lot of reverb. There's really nothing you can do to clean that up in post. So that's a case where getting up on the mic might help reduce that a little bit, but then you're going to have the downsides of being closer to the mic. If you're closer on the mic, you have to deal with greater possibility of mouth noises and also plosives, those poppy sounds, which if you're having a problem with that, get a pop filter. That's not something I've really had a problem with, so I don't use one of those, but I have the fortune of being able to isolate outside sound, which helps me get back off the mic a little bit more and still get a clean sound. The last two things I'll say about doing a voiceover is like time of day, your recording, and your energy. Something I'll hear a lot, not a lot, but often in video essays, especially more amateur ones or people less experienced, is you can tell clearly that two pieces of voiceover were recorded at different times. The quality of your voice will be very different in the morning than in the evening or at lunch, and it also varies depending on how much energy you have, how quickly you're delivering. The movie is about being lost existentially. Perhaps that's the idea. Perhaps the goal of the music video was... So I try, if I have to fix something in my voiceover, it sucks and it's a lot of work, but I often try to just go back and do the whole thing over again, or it's just best to like try to catch those mistakes right away, right after you record, with your setup still set up. That way, if you need to go back and re-record something, you can do it right then. Otherwise, if you're going back another day or that evening or whatever, the pitch and tone of your voice might have changed, your energy might have changed, your delivery might be different, and you can end up with a lot of those like issues where it sounds like you recorded it at different times, and that can pull people out of things. It can be an issue. You might also have people, I don't know if you can hear that, but you might also have people yelling things outside of your window, so avoid that. Do the best you can to get clean audio, and it's going to help you down the line. Having said that, if you do have decent clean audio, a lot can still take place in the mix, call it whatever you will. So I'm just going to show you a project here that I did a little while ago, and I'm going to go through kind of the basic stuff that I do. Part of the project that I'm going to jump into here would be like, you've got your music in, you've got your voiceover, in there edited in terms of pacing and breaks. Yeah, here we go. One of the first things I'll do is just cut out breaths. Likely, if you're recording close to the mic, you're going to have kind of loud breath sounds between sentences or wherever. Sometimes I just cut that straight out, but often what I'll do is just go in and like reduce the volume level. Sometimes not all the way. Sometimes it sounds more natural to just have it there, but much quieter. And one thing I don't like to do is, if I have a breath like I do here, I don't like to cut that out and like pull the audio in closer. A lot of times that breath ends up being like a very natural pause in the pacing. When you're recording, if you have performance in mind, you're subconsciously, I think you're pausing and taking those breaths at natural points throughout the script, especially if you've been doing it for a while. It just kind of naturally flows in a certain way, and I find that those points in the recording are often where I want them to be in the video. So sometimes if it just doesn't sound right or whatever, I'll close the gap on a breath or something, but most of the time I just leave it in there and just quiet it down. So you want to take out your breaths, you want to go to any transition point like this, and just make sure you have at least a little bit of a fade. And most of those, sometimes if you have a really clean audio recording, you're not going to have a problem. Like nobody's going to hear this gap, and I'm not having to like close that off. But especially if there's a breath at the end or something like that, you're going to want to fade that out. That way you're not getting, a breath cut off there. So that's often a first pass that I do, is just to cut out those breaths, and just make sure the pacing is right and that there aren't any hard cuts that are going to be a problem. Next thing, noise reduction. I try not to do noise reduction. It's best if you can just have a clean recording, but sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes you have noise that you got to deal with. And so you can run noise reduction in whatever program you're using to do your audio. There's some in Premiere, there's some in a lot of audio or video editors. But the key thing I will say about noise reduction, if you're going to do it, is be careful with it. My rule of thumb is that if you can hear that there's noise reduction on the audio, it's better to just leave the noise in. Introducing kind of fake sounding artifacts through noise reduction is not something you want. Here, let me see, maybe I can just show a quick example. So it looks like for this one I did do a light noise reduction. So let me see if I can solo this.
Scene's conflict rests on the fact that the attorney's normal lunch is undesirable, making Jimmy's casual bribe desirable. So how do you start this scene? With a shot of...
You might be able to hear a little bit like a fuzz or a hum in the back there, and that's what I was trying to eliminate. But if I go real heavy on this and just like
conflict
crank
rests
it up,
on the fact that the attorney's normal lunch is undesirable.
So I put a heavy, way too much noise reduction on there, and the noise is gone. But you can now hear these sort of weird, like plasticky sounds come in, and you don't want that. And oftentimes, if you're getting that, tone it way down or just let it be noisy, because I think like we as the listener can kind of tone out a little bit of noise, but it's hard to tone out something that just sounds fake. So if you're going to run noise reduction, be careful with that. Moving on to the actual mixing. So the first thing I'll do is, at this stage, I would bring in your music if you don't have it in yet. So get your music in early on, because you don't want to be adjusting too many things or mixing your levels too much without the music in there, because it's going to be in there at the end. The volume levels will all kind of affect each other. It's all in there together. So try not to if you're adjusting the levels on your voiceover or something, try not to be soloing your tracks too much, because you're not going to listen to it that way at the end. It's all going to be in there together. So you want to be adjusting things with all the other audio that's going to be in there in mind. Same with EQing, compressing, all that. You want to do it while you're hearing the other stuff, so that you can hear it not just how it sounds by itself, but in relation to the other audio. So once you get your music in there, I'll often kind of find like a sweet spot for the music in terms of leveling. And again, this is going back to like trusting your ear. There's not a number you're trying to hit. It's not a rule of thumb like always have the music -8 dB below the voice. You're just going to have to listen to it, because different audio tracks are going to be compressed differently at different volumes. Different music is going to sound different. It's going to have a different, spectrum intensity. So if you're always trying to like get the same numbers, it's not going to always sound the same. So you just have to learn to trust your ear. But first thing you're going to want to do on the music that I always do is I go in and just on my music track, I throw in a EQ. And if you want to learn more about EQing, go do some research. There, I'm going to assume you have sort of a basic knowledge.
Contrast.
I just throw one in here with a pretty wide Q, which is your width here. So that's going to affect the amount of the spectrum that you're affecting. So you want kind of a wide dip, and I place it in the 1200 to 1400 hertz range, depending on the quality of your voice. If your voice is lower, you're going to want to be in that 1200 range. If it's a little higher, you're going to be in the 15 range. But you're basically just creating a dip in the music in the range that your voice mostly is, so that your voice kind of pops through and the music kind of sits under and around your voice, instead of them kind of competing for the same space spectrally. So you don't want to go ham on this and like bring it way down. You don't want your music to just sound like bass and high end. You want to leave enough of the mids in there that it still sounds okay, but you want to bring it down, maybe -6, maybe -8. Just again, you're gonna have to listen to it and see what sounds good. So you can see how if I don't have that,
To show contrast and giving the scene nice.
that music is really pumping through kind of on top of my voice. And when I have it in there,
Motif of opening shots that helps the audience understand what's
it
important.
just sits around my voice a little better. It's subtle. It's everything with audio is subtlety, especially when you're dealing with an EQ. You don't want to you want it just at the level where you can kind of hear the change. And it's kind of easy to overdo it, but all the little changes are going to add up to make it sound good. If you've already adjusted the levels on your music throughout the video, once you throw this EQ on here, you're going to want to double check those, because often once you do that, you can actually bring the music up a little bit more. So simultaneously, you're not going to want to do one of these things and then be done and move on to the next thing, because you're going to have to kind of tweak all of this as it comes together. So you got your EQ on your music, and you're also going to want to do some EQ and compression on your voice. Same thing with compression. It's really easy to overdo this. So you can look up specific videos about how to do compression. My main advice here is going to be gentle. It's easy to over compress it. You can see in this video here, I even have a lot of areas where I kind of went in and manually adjusted the volume on a track instead of relying on compression to bring that up. And I'll often do that just so I can keep my ratio down around 4, 5, or 6. If you're pulling it up to the 8, 12 range, it's gonna get real crunchy. And also this, you don't want to jam your threshold way down there. You want it to be, where the audio's touching it, but not crushing things. So if we listen to a section here,
Hector Salamanca's presence in his business,
you can see the audio meter. It's got some play in it. You don't want everything to be jamming right up against the -6 dB or whatever you're leveling for. You want to have a little bit of play, a little bit of dynamic range. For YouTube, I find as long as you don't have most things sitting at -6 and then some things dipping below -12, people are going to be able to hear it. You can have that 6 dB of dynamic range fairly comfortably, and some things maybe your loudest stuff is going up to -3 and your quietest stuff is dipping just below or right at -12 on your voice, but you want to have that play. You don't want to crush it all together. And if you're doing your EQ on your music and leveling that properly as well, you're not going to have to crush it. Pay attention to that. But then once you have your compression on there and everything, you're going to want to go back and check the music, check the EQ, check the level in the music, because now that you've brought your voice up, the music might need to be a little louder. You might have to make some adjustments there. So it's important not to do things linearly, to just do one thing and then another. You gotta kind of mess with it and do it all together and go back and tweak things. And you'll get a feel for it. It'll start to come very naturally to you the more and more you do it. But yeah, compression, gentle. Same thing with EQing your voice. I have, again, EQ is a huge, vast subject. I'm not even going to be able to cover it in detail here. It takes a lot of practice and just doing it to learn. But I'll give a few basic tips here. So you want to be, like everything with audio, gentle. If you're, slamming stuff into the ceiling or pulling it out, you're going to create weird artifacts or weird problems that are going to make the audio sound less natural. And you have to be careful. This is where the trust your ears thing starts to fall apart, where you have to be careful, because it is very possible to throw like kind of an extreme EQ on there on something and just be listening to it over and over and over again, and your ear starts to get used to it. You start to adjust to that's how it sounds, and even though it might not sound better to you, you start to get used to it. So you have to be checking whatever you're doing against the original. So if you're slamming some EQ on there, make sure you're toggling that and like listening to the original and comparing it to any changes you're making and seeing if you are actually improving it or if you're just kind of pushing stuff around. Because it's really easy to just kind of like shove the sound in different directions but not actually be making any kind of improvement. So you'll also notice in Premiere here, I'm doing things in the track editor, which I prefer. You can do things on individual effects on the clip, that's fine. However you want to do this, pretty much every decent audio software or video editor should have an EQ that you can apply, a compressor that you can apply. These are basic tools that are going to be in anything. So how you do it doesn't really matter. This is my preferred way in the track mixer. Things are going to be the same in any EQ you use, more or less. So the same techniques apply. The other tip I'll give as far as EQ goes is that it's better to subtract than it is to add. So, okay, yeah, I'm going to throw a new EQ on here. Okay, so if we wanted to boost my lows and make it more bassy, I could just come in here with the low and just pull it up.
Of an establishing shot. Sometimes they'll open a scene on a subject that is a symbol of the
and you can hear that like warms things up. Or
ways, but they employ one technique that I think creatively uses the full potential.
I can pull down the highs, and that also warms things up, but in kind of a gentler way, I find. So yeah, I think it protects the sound a little more when you try to emphasize things by pushing what you don't want down instead of pulling what you do want up. And that'll help you not over compress things and make things too crispy and loud as well, because ultimately what we're going for here is like a very natural sound. Those are my EQ tips. And again, if you're EQing anything, if you EQ the voice, check that against the music and everything else, and make sure it's all sounding good and sweet together. As far as mastering goes, sometimes on the final the master, I'll throw like a compressor, maybe a hard limiter, so that I'm just making sure I'm not peaking. Again, you're just going to want a really gentle compressor. So just like, if I was going to master this, everything's more or less good. I'm just going to, see anything that's going over, -6 or whatever, I'm just going to gently compress with like a 4x1 or something. So you just get a little bit of softening for anything that's like getting really loud up in that range. Or just throw a hard limiter on there, at -1 or whatever. Just make sure you're not peaking. Ultimately, I think that stuff, that's just a little bit of salt on the whole deal. It's not making or breaking your audio for the most part. And then finally, you want to be like after you kind of have things in place, just check it on a few different outputs. Normally, I find that it's enough for me to listen to it on my laptop speakers and my slightly nicer headphones. These headphones aren't great, but they sound decent. And I mix it to sound good to my best source. So you want it to sound good on the best speakers you have to listen to it on. That's what you want to mix it for. But then make sure it sounds clear on other things. So my laptop speakers, they don't sound good, but I'm mixing it to be clear, for my voice to be clear on those speakers That way, you know, if somebody's watching it on their phone or laptop speakers or bad, you know, earbuds or something, I know they can hear my voice, they can have that clarity. But if you try to make it sound good on bad speakers, then it's not going to sound great for the people who do have good speakers. And you can't make it sound good on everything. So I just try to avoid even trying to make it sound good on the bad stuff, but I'm just checking that to make sure it sounds clear. There's clarity. You know, you can't like not hear something that you need to be able to hear. The other thing is different outputs are going to be EQ'd differently, so you'll hear different things emphasized. If I listen on my laptop, I'm much more likely to notice like smacky mouth noises or places where like there's a bit of a buzz or a fuzz in the background and I made a hard cut and you can hear it cut out where I needed to add a fade. So you can listen for that, and then on, you know, something with a little more bass sub side of things, you're going to hear things that you wouldn't hear otherwise. You want to watch especially that you're not like boosting too much in the bass and that your voice isn't too bassy mixing with any kind of bass in the music. That can get it's really easy to like muddy that area and get it too muddy down there. So check it there, make sure you don't need to bring the bass and your voice down a little bit, or the music, you know, whichever one. But yeah, I check it on 2 or 3 sources. A good one I mix for that, a bad one to check for clarity, and just go over it a few more times. That's about it. Like I said, learn to trust your ear, do what sounds good. The biggest problems are overcorrecting things, putting too much EQ, too much compression, too much noise reduction or whatever. Experiment, do some tests, and you'll get better over time. So I hope that was helpful. Go subscribe to my real channel at youtube.com/ThomasFlight. Hopefully this will be helpful to somebody.